3:45. Good afternoon, everybody. We ready to learn how to take back our school boards?
Yeah.
All right, C45, so we're going to go ahead and get started. First off, I wanted to thank you all for coming to the very last panel session here at Netroots Nation, especially for those of you sitting at home on a Saturday afternoon. Thank you for electing to spend an hour with us instead of an extra hour, presumably at the Fifth Circle of Purgatory, O'Hare International Airport. So thank you very much for coming. My name is Kent Nago. I am the founder and president of Pantograph Labs. We are a boutique digital agency that specializes in email fundraising that is also 100% human-powered. So we specialize in grassroots fundraising without corporate PAC money or without corporate influence. And we are here on behalf of thousands of supporters who have helped fund our work, taking back school boards and bringing about progressive change. I wanted to introduce you to two of my esteemed colleagues here, Liz Radcliffe, who is founder of Futures PAC, and Sean Frame, who is founder of the Six PAC, and is also running for California State Assembly District 6 in an open Democratic seat. So we have a crisis brewing in our public schools. Hate group Moms for Liberty has seized 275 seats across our nation just last year, flipping school boards left and right to take over and pass book bans, an anti-LGBTQ agenda, and to erase history and indoctrinate our children in a right-wing version of what they believe is our country. So I want to first allow our panelists to introduce ourselves, tell us where we're from, and about the previous school board service.
Thanks, everybody, for being here. Thanks, everybody, for being here. It's nice to see all of your faces. My name is Liz Radcliffe. I live in southern Minnesota, which is a rather purple area. I go by she and her pronouns. I forgot to say that. I'm a school board member. I was elected in 2020. So I'm in my first term right now in, like I said, a very purple area with a rather vocal minority. And I'm sure you've probably heard plenty of stories, and I can tell you that they're probably all true in terms of the right-wing bullying that school boards are receiving.
What motivated you to run for school board?
So in 2016, we all know what happened that particular year. In the town that I'm from, we have a very large Somali immigrant community. And right after the Muslim ban was laid down, I guess, I was very concerned for a lot of my friends and their children, because we have a lot of them in our community. And I was really kind of worried about what their school experience was going to be, given that a lot of their family are now either going to be deported or they're not going to be able to leave and then return, or at least that was their fear. So that, in conjunction with a lot of right-wing people just kind of came out of the woodwork, and I guess I was living with my rose-colored glasses on, and that was the wake-up call, that there were quite a few extremists in our area, and they now felt emboldened to do some pretty terrible things. So I was wondering what I can do to make a difference. I started selling my artwork and paying off school lunch debt, but just didn't feel like that was enough. So I ran for school board. We had 19 candidates running, which was a good sign, I think, for 3 open seats. And despite my lack of public speaking ability, I managed to get elected. And since then, we have passed sweeping equity programs, which there has been a considerable backlash to. But we have mostly a progressive majority on the school board, so we have been able to get some really good things done, and I look forward to doing more.
Yeah, you can clap.
Liz.
You can clap.
Yeah.
Highly
Give her a
encouraged.
round. This on? Okay, good. So yeah, the funny thing about hearing Liz's story is when you talk about school boards, what you often hear is somebody who's a community member and something happened in their community that made them feel like this was the service they had to do. For me, my service started when my son's principal was shot during the school day by the school custodian, shot and killed. And I was an involved parent at that point. I had never considered public service, but when a parents committee was formed to help find a new principal for our school, because this happened in the middle of the school year, I stepped up for that just to try and help our community heal. And out of that process, I was asked to run for school board, and I served for 9 years. I was fortunate in a way that I served in a very conservative community, and actually we built a very progressive board intentionally, using, when people would step down midterm, we used appointments. We also encouraged people to run. We actively sought people who we thought would be excellent school board members to build a progressive majority of a board in a very conservative community. So that's the work that I did, and it was, really out of that need for our community to heal that I ended up on the school board. And then once there, I took the job very seriously and really made an effort to serve every member of our community. We had a very high free and reduced lunch population in this community. We had a large immigrant population in the community that was largely invisible prior to us taking over that board. And we made an intentional effort to bring that community into the school, have their voices heard, and to really do the work that needed to be done for this community. Education should be for everybody. And it's sad that we have what's going on now where people actually feel like that's not true. So that's why I'm doing the work that I do now. When we formed the six-pack, it was originally with the idea of grassroots fundraising for all kinds of progressive candidates, but primarily federal candidates. Then we moved down to state races. And then when we moved to school board races, we realized that we were doing something that had to be done. That there are 90,000 school board members in the United States. 90,000. Let's think about that for a second. That's really the grassroots of politics in this country. And I heard just the other day that 68% of those school board members aren't going to run again. That's a terrifying thought in the times that we have. But I'm here hopefully to bring you good news about how we can really push back against that and get people who care about students and families and their community to be the members of our school boards.
That's right, and I can't even wait till the end of this panel to say that the six-pack so far this year, we've raised over $70,000 intended for school board candidates, and our plan before the end of the cycle is to contribute to at least 100 candidates. And Futures PAC is a newer startup, and we intend to have a smaller but very significant goal. So my ask for you, before we get into the depressing part, which is what the right-wing extremists are doing to our schools, is first for you to follow us, follow our groups here on social media, and you can scan this code to donate to our work. Remember, $1,000 in a school board campaign goes a very long way. We've had candidates come up to tell us that we've even helped them run an entire new mailer in districts that maybe have 2,000 or 3,000 voters. So that's my pitch to you, and think of somebody you know who's running for school board and let us know. So now for the depressing part, the right-wing threat to our schools. Book bans, anti-trans bathroom bills. What do these people want? Why are they turning these normally sleepy school board elections into these battlegrounds? What have you seen?
You want to take that, Liz, since you're at the front line of that battle?
Sure, yeah. Well, when I was elected, it was in 2020, kind of mid-COVID. Did not realize what I was getting myself into. But with that said, I would not want to be anywhere else. So the very first few meetings, we were met with a fairly large crowd in our board meetings because the controversy with masks, or controversy for some. And of course, parents were mad because there was distance learning, there was hybrid learning, and then we did have a mask mandate in our school. So as stories would take root, and they weren't true stories per se, more and more outraged parents would show up with information or what they thought was correct information, I guess, but completely ridiculous misinformation, and basically shout us down for, we had meetings run 3 or 4 hours because there were so many people lined up to speak. A few instances where we had police there to help us navigate to our vehicles. Afterwards, we had one incident where one of our frequent flyers, I call him, as somebody who would come to our meetings all the time, had recorded a meeting, which they're all recorded, but he recorded it himself and then sent it to Fox News, so we were on the Laura Ingraham show. And, but that started the 4 a.m. death threats, I mean, like phone calls from not local places. They were from all sorts of different places, and they all kind of had the same, some of them were almost word-for-word messages. So these are organizations that are not grassroots or not local, and they're disseminating information nationwide is what it seems like. So we've got people calling from all over saying pretty much the same thing. I mean, there's a few variations, but it's essentially the same thing.
And they didn't just stop at masks, right? Fox News, every time Fox News amplifies some new panic about the schools, you get more phone calls. So, like, what other panics have we lived through just in the last year?
So after the masks, you know, the vaccine was available, and once the CDC lifted their mandate, of course, CRT was the next thing, and that is still, in my community anyway, an ongoing. We kind of go through some hills and valleys. But yeah, that's another misinformation talking point that they have received, that we teach CRT in school, which they're equating to our equity policies. So that's very upsetting for some. We are now dealing with, in one of the classes, the white supremacy pyramid. I don't know if anybody is familiar with that graphic, but it's a pyramid, and at the top it has overt white supremacy, which would be, you know, really obvious things, using racist language or lynching. I mean, very obvious things at the overt. And then the bottom part of the pyramid is covert white supremacy. And literally every person that's complained about this pyramid is checking all the boxes in the lower part of the pyramid. So it's the all lives matter, it's white silence, it's that sort of thing. So those, that's the current controversy du jour.
Yeah. And Sean, what would you say is the #1 threat facing our public schools right now? Or maybe the top 3. I won't make you just pick one.
Well, you know, obviously, it's these attacks on curriculum. That's a huge one, right? So in California, the curriculum includes materials about Harvey Milk. And literally, I think it was Temecula School Board wanted to pull that curriculum material. And I don't know if you've seen it in the news, but our Governor Gavin Newsom literally said, if you're going to pull that material, we're going to buy those books, and we're going to make sure that every student and family has access to that curriculum material. So that's a big one, right? It's really that hate-focused stuff. But I do want to say that those things are just the way to wind people up. There is a much greater thing at work here, and that greater thing is nothing less than the destruction of public education in our country. Let's be clear. I just want to say that out loud. The intent behind all of this, of the people who fund these groups, is to destroy public education in America. That is the intent.
So what do they want to replace it with?
Well, I mean, they'd like to replace it with private education for those who can gain access to it, right? They would like to replace it with a Christian nationalist education system for folks. I mean, let's be clear, that's what they're actually after. And by the way, and no education for some people.
Yeah, I want to go back to this curriculum change thing because it's happening in blue states like California, but it's certainly worse in states like Texas and Florida. Florida has been expanding its "Don't Say Gay" law. Do you have any comments as to what the effect is on our classrooms and what our children are learning when right-wing governments come down and say you can't teach this or that? What are they targeting?
What are they? Well, the outcome of it is for students, as that it's they don't feel seen or a part of the school system, right? Like that's the outcome from them. You know, when these actions are being taken to manipulate the public discourse, the people who suffer are the students.
Right.
So when somebody says, "Oh, I'm for parents' rights," what about students' rights? Where are the students in this equation?
Right, we're here to defend our students' right to read. You know, we trust that they are going to be able to make an informed decision, right? So I wanted to bring up book bans, which have been very high profile. How many of you live in a community where there's been a book ban fight? Raise your hands. Anybody want to tell us what books they were coming after?
I don't have a list, but they have a list. You go on, Moms for Liberty. And
Right.
Right-wing groups, they have a list of the books they want to ban, and it's circulating.
Right. What he's saying is we have a list here. We have a list of books that they've been banning. Who else? Who else wants to tell us an example? Yeah.
So I don't currently live in this community. I used to live in this community. I moved out for obvious reasons. But they would ban anything overtly LGBTQ. Anything with any sort of mention of LGBTQ. I think they tried to ban Love, Simon.
Right. Love, Simon. I'll take one more example. Yes. Right over here.
Anything where people can learn about racism.
Right.
Kill a Mockingbird, The Color Purple, the list goes on and on.
Right. And why are they targeting these books? Why these books? Why not any other books?
My theory is they want to squash intellectual freedom. This is kind of the authoritarian playbook. Everybody has to be taught to think the same way, and everybody has to conform to what they feel is their, in like a white Christian nationalist type of parameters. And just piggybacking off of what Sean had mentioned, this is an effort to destroy public education, but I would even take it a step further in that it's one of the ground floor of dismantling a democracy. If you don't have a robust public education, you don't have an informed electorate, and if you end up having a privatized, segregated education system that is teaching one point of view, that's not democracy. That's not giving people freedom. They're basically being force-fed.
Right. And it seems that there's been a widespread movement to blur the lines between church and state. In Texas, they've passed bills requiring you post "In God We Trust," right? But when they say it's religious freedom in our schools, it's not everybody's religion, right? So a gentleman earlier brought up that there's a list. There's a list that they've been using nationwide in multiple school districts where we've been seeing over and over again the same requests for book bans from requesters who openly admit they haven't even read the book. Sometimes even children's books that are 16 pages long. They say, I haven't read the book. They don't have time. So I wanted to transition now to talking about tactics, right? How are they doing this? Is this an organic grassroots movement that we're seeing, or is there something more sinister afoot?
Yeah, I don't think it's an organic grassroots movement. I mean, I think people are being wound up to be the face of the movement, but I don't think it's necessarily people having these ideas on their own and going to the school board and trying to get books banned, right? They're being wound up in a very specific way.
So how are they being wound up? What tactics are they deploying?
Well, I mean, obviously, we know there's a very strong media matrix on the right, and that includes everything from social media to traditional media. And the messages are being reinforced very specifically using very specific language and tactics. And so, when I say people are being wound up, they're living in that media bubble that reinforces their point of view, and then they're taking that to the wider public. And it's funny. I mean, I think I was talking with you earlier, Liz, that people would show up to your meetings when you're saying that they were saying things like, basically repeating QAnon conspiracy theory in your meetings. And for people who weren't familiar with that, and that would include probably most of the people in the room, it sounds absolutely insane. But to people inside that world, it sounds perfectly legitimate. It's using terms like groomers. It's like...
Yeah, what's the most insane QAnon conspiracy you've had to deal with on the school board?
Well, if an issue comes up and we're defending an LGBTQ book or you know, it's always surrounding LGBTQ that we get called a groomer if we are, you know, standing up for these students. And well, I mean, I could go into the weeds here, and I'm not going to, but they have some strange ways of twisting a curriculum, and they'll tie it to some baby-eating conspiracy. I mean, just really outlandish, crazy stuff.
Yeah, one example we talked about was social emotional learning, which is the latest conservative bugaboo. What is it actually, and what do they say it is?
Yeah, so social emotional learning, that came out of the mask policy in our district anyway. I mean, it's been around for a long time, but it really kind of, the need for it was highlighted after the masks. So we've had all these parents complaining that the masks were hurting the mental health of their kids. And I'm sure that there's a degree of truth to that. I mean, it's tough on kids just going through COVID and distance learning and then coming to school with masks. But then, oh shoot, I lost my track.
And what are they saying social emotional learning is?
Okay, so it's basically teaching kids how to express healthy emotions and how to cope with emotions, how to basically be a functioning person in a global community or a larger community.
It's too woke, though. We can't be having any friendship in school now, can we?
Yeah, so we implemented that, and we hired more counselors and mental health workers in the school to accommodate the rise we were seeing in mental health issues. And then the same parents that were really mad at us for the masks then started calling us groomers because we had implemented this social emotional program.
Right. So now I wanted to talk. We've talked about what they're doing, how Moms for Liberty has come in and had volunteers demand the removal of books involving same-sex penguins and all kinds of other stuff. That was a real example, by the way. Escambia County, Florida, they banned a book called Tango Makes Three, the true story of two penguins that adopted an egg at the Bronx Zoo, and it was denounced as pornographic, which, yeah, the penguins were grooming it. But This is not a grassroots movement. There's a lot of dark money flowing in behind this that we have to combat. So why don't we go through some of our friends on the right and talk about how each organization fits in the ecosystem of the right-wing takeover, right? So yeah, why don't you go ahead and walk us through this?
All right, well, so here is a list. It's not a complete list by any stretch of the imagination, but these are probably at least some of the larger nationwide groups. There are other nationwide groups, but there's also probably in each state has probably, you know, I don't know, a lot of different local organizations. But Moms for Liberty is probably the one that most people have heard of because they're so in our face, I guess. They just had an annual summit in Philadelphia, excuse me, and Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis were both speakers, as were, I think, all the Republican presidential candidates, and other very interesting people as well. But
yeah. So they had that conference, right? They even had a speaker come in and defend one of their volunteers using a Hitler quote in a newsletter. Right? These folks are straight up fascists. They're not even afraid. So let's talk about the most famous one, right? Moms for Liberty. How many of you have interacted with Moms for Liberty before? Yeah. This week. What happened this week?
I'm from Texas.
She said, yeah. Well, the founder of Mothers Against Greg Abbott in the house. We've got a celebrity in the house. Yeah.
So hi, I sat next to you at the Polly's.
I did.
Yeah, we sat next to each other. We had like dinner together. Anyway, so this week, the Moms for Liberty and the Texas Truth Project or something, they were having a book banning event in Lubbock. And what we did is we got our members to call all the hotels and just shut it down. They had to change their venue 6 times. And then they finally got a venue that was, one of those 6 mountain Christian nationalist churches. They were able to have the venue changed to one of those churches.
So they say they're a nonpartisan organization. They're structured as a nonprofit. But Liz, tell us what are they up to?
Well, Moms for Liberty, obviously they are into book banning. They don't want any sort of inclusive curriculum. At least that's my experience. Beyond that, I mean, that's their general mission. We don't have one in my community, although we do have Moms for Liberty in southern Minnesota, and they pretend that they have kids in our district until they're found out. So they operate outside of their own communities. But yeah, so the last that I looked, there's over 300 chapters. There was that was the most recent thing. So they're spreading, because when we first started putting these slides together, it was 275. Now there's 300, and they're Katie bar the door, because they are going to be a force. But yeah, they're pretty terrifying.
Yeah, they have made violent threats against librarians, against teachers. They're not. There's a central movement, but each club does seem to operate a bit autonomously from each other. And this is an example of some of the violent rhetoric that they've used, right? Even here in California. So they've got close ties to the Proud Boys. They used a Hitler quote and then refused to apologize for it. These are all interconnected movements, right? Anti-democracy, why don't you talk a little bit about how Moms for Liberty and these sort of anti-education crusaders are connected to some of the anti-democracy movements and that we've had?
Well, I would say, first of all, like even in California, in the Sacramento region where I'm at, we've seen that when Moms for Liberty shows up at a school board meeting, a lot of times they will actually bring the Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, 3%ers, those folks along with them. Why? Because it's intimidating. It's an intimidation tactic. They've surrounded the house of principals, of educators. These groups are overtly allied in this effort. And, it's not that the Southern Poverty Law Center has designated Moms for Liberty as a hate group is not surprising, given that they're working together on these activities. So, yeah, they're intentional in their intimidation tactics. And, people think, oh, this is in Texas and Florida and other places. But let's be clear, their intent is to do this everywhere. And they have a very specific way of going about it.
Yeah, and they don't need to live in the areas that they're targeting, which is
right.
They can go viral.
Now we have Parents Defending Education, another nonprofit organization. What are they up to?
Yeah, so this one is, I don't think this one is yet recognized as a hate group, but they are funded by the Koch brothers. And let's see, they're opposed to a lot of the same things. And that's another thing you'll find in common with most of these groups. It's critical race theory or equity, LGBTQ issues. Basically they just want to, like I said, squash intellectual freedom, critical thinking.
And they are definitely organized. They can bring large turnout to meetings, and it's actually very reminiscent of the early Tea Party wave when they would shut down town halls to have the heckler's veto, right, so that we could get our words in edgewise.
It's about as grassroots as the early Tea Party movement, too. In other words, you will see, if you start digging into these groups, what you'll see immediately is there's lots of right-wing dark money behind these groups that's giving them the, not just the money, but the messaging.
So we have here No Left Turn Education, an actual hate group.
Yes, and again, with all these groups, this one is pretty well known for it, but it's also Moms for Liberty. They use terms that on their face maybe don't sound as diabolical as they are. But they play on parents' fears. You see innocence under siege. and lead parents to believe that somehow their children are being preyed upon in school, which is dangerous because that's going to get somebody hurt. There are teachers that are harassed or targeted for, any sort of discussion about LGBTQ issues. And it's nothing, it's just human conversations.
Well, and also, of course, that rolls down to the students, right? It makes the students unsafe. If they feel comfortable going after the teachers on these issues, let's be clear that happens in the schools, and it makes many of our students unsafe. This is a student safety issue. This is a student mental health issue that is happening as a result of really what is really a privatization effort for schools. That's like the Koch brothers don't have any interest in these culture war issues per se. They have an interest in seeing schools get privatized, in seeing public education come to an end. So the victims in these wars are the students.
That's right. That's right. And then another group named Mass Resistance. For those of you in the South, you will know this is quite the name, isn't it? What is this group named for?
That was a group, but back during the segregation, that was a group that fought to keep segregation. That's what they called themselves.
And it wasn't just to keep segregation. They were so dedicated during massive resistance to keep segregation that in many areas they actually shut down the public school system.
Yes. Yeah.
So it was not actually in their interest to keep the public school system open. Turning Point USA. So, we also have a lot of regular conservative groups that aren't necessarily specializing in our schools coming down, wreaking all kinds of havoc, right? When right-wing extremists come to school boards and denounce wokeism, what do we think it means, right? Do we have any idea what they're talking about?
I don't think they know what they're talking about because they can't seem to define it. But yeah, wokeism is basically, to me, or what I think it is, what I think they think it is inclusion. They don't want it.
Yeah, and these folks raised $80 million. That's a lot of dark money that we're up against. That's why I had the donate link up earlier, because we need all the resources that we can get to compete against them.
Yeah, I think wokeism to them is just, do you want justice and equity in your schools? You're a problem. Right.
And I think what's interesting is about all these groups we've mentioned so far is that none of these are actually electorally focused groups, right? They're not actually funneling money into campaigns, but we'll get to that in a bit. Tell us about the Manhattan Institute.
Well, this one, as you can see by the slide, there's a lot of connection, again, with the Koch brothers, Alec, and the DeVos family. And then and some other organizations that have been funding climate denial, and it goes back to the tobacco industry.
What is ALEC, in case folks aren't familiar with that?
That's the American Legislative Exchange Council, and they're sort of notorious for basically writing Republican legislation and then just letting the Republican basically is the middleman. They write the legislation, give it to the representative who they, I'm sure, fund, and then that bill becomes law.
And then, this isn't just about school boards, right? Sean, you're running for state assembly. On the state legislative level, what are right-wing state legislatures doing to enable this kind of extremism in our schools?
Well, I mean, they're using it as an excuse for privatization, charter efforts, and other things that hollow out our public education system. They're saying that our public schools, in providing equity and justice, are doing something wrong, and they're using that as the justification for vouchers, for tax credits, education savings account, when these are all just words for money given to people who that will hollow out our public school system. So that's what they're doing. I think that's their agenda.
And all these previous groups are 501c3s, 501c4s. They're not necessarily directly spending on ads to elect these candidates, but what they're doing is changing the narrative, creating an organizing hub for extremists to sort of insert themselves in these communities and pretend to be nonpartisan actors, right? But there are actual PACs going in. So 1776 Project PAC. What brings them into the slide deck?
Well, so they're like the super patriots, or at least that's, I think, how they see themselves. But I believe that this one was created in response to the 1619 project, or at least they've reacted to it. I don't know which came first, but and of course the 1619 project is advocates for our actual Black history and what actually happened, where they're not comfortable with that, so they've decided to take it over and do with the 1776 project.
Yeah, and it's funded by Richard Uline, a name that those of you who follow campaign finance might be familiar. GOP mega donor, very heavily involved in a number of Senate races, right? Heir to basically the cardboard box fortune and all the other office supplies. Anybody who opens a business will every quarter get a giant catalog of every office supply known to man, which funds right-wing extremism in our schools.
And that's spelled U-L-I-N-E.
Yes.
Yeah, in case you're wondering.
But now, this now comes actually to my favorite right-wing group that is funding school board extremism, because what's special about it is that it's not even a PAC at all. It's a corporation. So tell us how Patriot Mobile has gotten involved in some of these races.
Well, they were a big player in Texas, and so on Steve Bannon's podcast or radio show, The War Room, which he is, by the way, the one of the right-wing operatives that has advocated targeting school boards. I mean, start there and we'll work our way up. But he spotlighted them. It's basically a mobile phone company that is the company is owned by what I suspect are white nationalists, and so they were highlighted on Steve Bannon's show and made a whole bunch of money from the publicity, or raised a bunch of money, and then basically helped get a lot of people, right-wing people, elected to school boards. I think, is this the one? Yeah, their candidates won every race.
And they did it by basically taking their profits from the phone company and plowing it into a super PAC and just running the campaign. They didn't give any money in most of these districts to the candidates themselves. They just ran the shadow campaign for them on an IE basis in states like Texas that basically have anarchy in the campaign finance laws, right? So Sean, why don't you talk a little bit about how lax campaign finance laws have allowed for this takeover to happen, right?
Well, I mean, it's real interesting. As somebody who raises funds for candidates all over, the laws are very different in every state. In some states, there are almost no laws. I liken it to like you could just show up with a dump truck full of money and randomly dole it out to people and there's no reporting requirements, nothing. So in those states, and Texas being one of them, it's really easy to just get involved and take over the process. I mean, $600,000 in school board races is an enormous amount of money. These races are small local races. So if somebody's spending that kind of money on it, it's very easy to control the narrative. And look, let's be clear. We should just get all money out of politics, period. Can we get a little round of applause for that, please? But we desperately need campaign finance reform. We need stronger requirements in all of these states to keep this money from taking over what is the most grassroots part of politics.
I want to talk a little bit about probably a less divisive socially source of money, but it's still very important to school board elections, which is charter schools and the companies behind charter schools. I think we've paid a lot of attention to book bans, but we have the old-fashioned charter schools and voucher programs still attacking our schools. So tell us a little bit about the impact of charter school money, especially in California, where you're from.
Yeah, the Charter Schools Association in California has become a rival to the California Teachers Association in terms of the amount of money they spend on elections. And not just that, but they really are intentional about taking over boards. So I'm an education worker myself. I work for the Sacramento County Office of Education. 4 of our school board members have direct association with charter schools. One actually has schools chartered by the agency that he sits on the board for and is currently being investigated by the California State Attorney General for a conflict of interest. Another is married to the head of the Charter Schools Association, and the other two are either on the board or administrators in charter schools. So they have been long making an inroad into boards of education, particularly those at the county level where the chartering is done in California. And so this is just another extension of that. I feel like when they get these Moms for Liberty type candidates, they'll just have more people, they'll get greater majorities on boards faster, and they'll be doing it using this, what I would just call a hateful approach to filling school boards for the purpose of hauling out public education.
Liz, how much money did you have to spend to get elected to your school board race?
I didn't even have to file paperwork. It was $700.
$700. So if you had a cell phone company that had $600,000, that's a lot of races you could buy.
Yeah.
So that concludes the slide deck portion of our presentation. So I'm going to turn this part off here and bring us back down here to the discussion, which is now that we have thoroughly terrified everybody as to the right-wing threat to our schools, we want to talk a little bit about action. What on earth can we do about it? Right, so I've mentioned already fundraising, right? Our model is a little different than Patriot Mobile, right? We want to enable candidates to run the campaigns that they want from the ground, right? So, Sean, tell us a little bit how we started piloting this approach last year and the candidates that we were able to support.
So we went right to people and said, who are the people in your community who are running for school board who deserve our support? That was just our initial thought. Like, people in the community will know who the people are who care about students and families and care about education. So we started with that as a premise. We're obviously joining now with partner organizations like Stop Moms for Liberty, fantastic national organization that has chapters across the country. We're basically finding partners across the country, Run for Something, even Emerge, people who are actually going out and finding candidates themselves. So we've taken a more intentional look at that and realizing that, we aren't going to be able to get anywhere near funding the 90,000 candidates that there are, or actually whatever fraction of that is, probably something like that.
I don't have an office supply fortune to help you out, but if you guys know any billionaires,
Yeah.
you can probably.
Yeah.
How many candidates did we support last year?
We supported 27 candidates, which is great, and 16 of them won, which was even better. And now we're moving toward 100 candidates, and I think we're going to even get beyond 100 if I'm be so bold as to say that, the way things are going, which is great. And we really do prioritize races where we know that either people are trying to take over a board, or whether it's a very competitive race and there are multiple candidates who are on the Moms for Liberty side. It's nice of them when they tell us who they are, by the way, then we really can prioritize those races. We appreciate that work that they do for us, so we know that we need to be on the other side. So yeah, we definitely do that. And I would just say too, for all of you out there thinking, how do I extend this effort in my community, because I know you're not going to be able to help every last candidate, I think a big part of it is identifying good school board candidates. And there are very excellent ways to do this that I would think we should talk about. First, look for those parents or educators who work maybe in a different district but have students in your district who show up all the time. There are going to be those parents who sit on the budget committee or the facilities committee or the English language learners committee who show up every single time. Those are the people you should go to first. They already care. They've demonstrated their caring for the school district, for students and families. Talk to them. Be intentional. People sometimes just need to be asked, right? So ask them. Look for people who just recently retired. The beloved teacher who just retired after 30 years. They love nothing more than to come back to the place where they formerly worked and to support their schools. So these are great sources. Look to community leaders. If there are community leaders involved in other areas in your community, whether it's in civil rights or immigration rights, these are excellent people who should be on school boards and should be bringing that perspective of their community into the school board. Really, find those people that we know care about students and families. And here's the good news I'm going to tell you. After all this gloom and doom, When good people who care about students and families run against these extremist candidates, they win. They win even when they're not as well funded, because people know. The average person who cares nothing about politics wants people who are sensible and reasonable running their schools. They absolutely do. And so it's just a matter of finding those candidates who are sensible and reasonable and care about students and families, and making sure that the community knows who they are. If you haven't thought about it, if you're in this room and you're interested in this topic, you could be a school board candidate.
We mean it. That means you. You're looking at me right now in this room. That means you. So, Liz, you helped us identify a lot of these candidates. What were some themes around of their messaging, right? With these candidates that we helped win these school board races, they ran a positive pro-schools agenda, right? How do we combat this right-wing extremism with a positive message?
That's really, it's almost as simple as that. I think because even like Sean said, most parents, if they are paying attention, and you don't even have to be paying that close of attention these days, can recognize an extremist versus a concerned parent, or somebody with the kid's best interests at heart. So a lot of it is just getting that message out.
Yeah, what's our vision for the public school system?
Yeah, it's basically, we need a robust public education system in order to sustain our democracy. It promotes freedom, it promotes inclusion, and yeah, we just need to get people, to remember that, because yeah, it's a dangerous road we're going to go down if extremists get a foothold.
Yeah, I think that you can't lean into that message enough, that everybody wants schools that are safe, inclusive, just, and equitable. The minority of people who get wound up in their right-wing, news matrix, media matrix, they are an extreme minority of people, even in red and purple communities. The people who want schools where their kids won't be bullied, where their students are safe and free to express themselves, that's the majority. That is the majority of people. That's the good news. That's all of us, and it's all the people we know, and it's even all the people who don't pay any attention to politics. That's what they want.
But this extremist minority is very motivated, right? Do you think that there's an effect that comes from election timing, right? Many of these school board elections are in off years or decided in primaries.
Well, thank you for lobbing me that softball. Look, as somebody who's running for the legislature, I think one of the things that really makes some of these school board elections swing so quickly to the extremists is that they're being run in odd years. This is what Florida and Texas do. They're running their school board elections in years where the vote will be the lowest, right? So it's very easy for a minority to motivate a small handful of people and try and overtake a school board. So we should be looking at aligning school board elections with the general election in general election years, even years. So that's the first thing that I think we could do. And if I may, since I'm on a legislative kick here, I'd just like to put in a plug for the fact that Illinois passed a ban on book bans, essentially, and said that if you're a library or a school that's banning books, you will lose your funding. California has a bill just like that in the legislature right now, AB 1078. And so if you want to push for those things in your community, this is a great way, particularly if you're in a blue state with a Democratic legislature. This is a great way to push back on these book bans. There are legislative remedies for some of this. One more thing I would add as a school worker is we should be limiting the contract terms of school superintendents. And why? Well, first of all, if your board does get taken over, the first thing they're going to do is start replacing administrators. And if administrators, like in California, for example, they have a 3-year term if they're county administrator. If you are going to terminate that contract, you have to pay out 3 years. For most schools and school boards, that is a bridge too far. unless the person has literally committed a felony. I mean, you're going to have to explain to your community why you're paying out huge sums of money for that person to be removed. With shorter terms, the superintendents, the administrators will be far more responsive to the public, to the school boards, and I think that would be a good change as well.
Great. Well, I'm going to ask one more question before we open it up to the floor. And this will be a bit of a, let's zoom out a little bit, right? What inspires you to keep fighting for public schools? Why are you still in this business? It doesn't pay very well. I'll start with you, Liz. In fact, do you get paid at all to be on the school board?
Yeah, we do get paid, but it's very, very, very little.
It's a lot less than a Supreme Court
It just
justice.
basically covers expenses. Yeah. Why I keep doing it is because I feel like this is the front line of the war for democracy. And I'm afraid that if the vocal minority in my community were to get a foothold in our schools, I'm just really worried about what that means for our community and beyond. My youngest just graduated this year, so I don't have any kids in the district now going forward, but I am very concerned for the future. I feel that the board we have right now, we've got a great vision. We are motivated. We are making change, and I'm scared to see that progress be halted.
What about you, Sean?
Yeah, for me, it's about our young people. You know, public education in my family was transformational. You know, my mom was the first one in her family, youngest of 5 kids, to attend university. Why? Because we had a robust public education system. It's transformational. And if we lose that, I feel like we lose the very foundation of our country. And yeah, it's for the young people. That's why we should all be involved in education.
Can I add one more thing about the schools, public schools? It really is the heart of a community. I mean, so if you have strong public schools and if they're robust and they're thriving, the community is thriving. That's almost always a statistical reflection. So if one or the other of those breaks down, you're going to see it in the, either in the school or the community.
All right, well, we have a few minutes left, so I'd love to take some questions from the audience. The last questions in Netroots 2023. What's your name?
Jonathan. Wait, did it pick up?
Yeah, so Jonathan, where are you from?
Chicago.
So what do we got here?
I was wondering if you had, this question is specifically for Liz because you're currently serving on a school board right now. I don't know if you've heard of the weird theory, the litter box theory. Has anyone actually asked that to you at a school board meeting?
Yes.
So what is the litter box theory for those that spend a lot less time on the internet?
So the litter box theory is essentially one of those right-wing crackpot theories that's essentially insinuates that teachers are providing litter boxes for furries to urinate in, and it was investigated. It was proved to be a hoax, and it's just another right-wing crackpot theory.
Yeah, have you encountered this? What other crackpot theories have you had to fight back against?
Well, the litter box, and then a kind of a tandem issue with that was the furries and kids dressing like cats, and scratching at each other, and behaving like feral cats. That was another one, which is not happening.
So how do we combat this kind of misinformation or disinformation?
Well, and basically, we did enhance our communications department at our school to kind of fight this disinformation. That's really about it. That, and then we kind of recruited some supportive, progressive groups like Indivisible and a couple other of those type of groups in our community to show up at meetings and kind of counter, during the open forum when these crazy stories come up, because we don't engage, we just listen during the meetings. So other community members would then go up to the microphone and refute these stories. And to the point where, for a while there, I think they were shaming the crazy people. They stopped showing up for a little while, which was really nice.
I'll come back all the way back here. What's your name?
My name is Sumi Cho. And, related to the topic, the litter box topic on disinformation, we know all of the groups that you displayed on the screen, thanks so much for the slideshow, are saying that they're opposed to critical race theory and saying that it indoctrinates children to hate themselves and be ashamed of themselves and that, it's divisive, etc. So this is another form of disinformation, and we've seen initially a lot of people say, oh, you should just respond by pivoting and answering that CRT is not taught in school. So I'm wondering how you have addressed this form of disinformation and whether it's worked.
Okay, so we did in the beginning of the controversy say that we do not teach critical race theory. You are confusing that with our equity policies. And then we refuted that. We basically outlined what our equity policies are and said this is what this board was elected to do. We ran on this equity policy. We won, and we're moving forward with it. So there's always another election. If the majority of the community doesn't like what we're doing, then I guess they can show up and vote us out. But that's basically what we did. We just said that's not CRT. You're getting upset about our equity policies, and
I also wanted to back up a bit because some of these attacks on CRT are actually attacks on our history curriculum itself.
Yeah.
So, how, Sean, in the California Assembly, how would you combat censorship in our history education?
Well, I think that the legislature. I mean, the State Board of Education has adopted curriculum. And that curriculum goes out to every school. And in fact, in California, and I'm sure they have similar things in other states, the sufficiency of materials can be challenged by parents, meaning if a school district decides to not adopt current curriculum, you can actually file a formal complaint and the school district will have to actually adopt the curriculum. So this was a tactic for a while in some right-wing school districts or where they had right-wing boards. They would say, well, the curriculum changed. We don't like the way it changed, so we're just not going to adopt the modern curriculum. And they would be using textbooks that were a decade out of date or more. The state finally came in and said, if you are going to continue receiving funding for your district, you have to adopt the curriculum. And you have to provide the materials to students. And now our governor is actually saying, look, if you try and remove the curriculum, we will not only purchase it, we'll make sure that every student and family has access to it. So AB 1078 is a bill that would literally attach funding or fines even to school districts that try to censor the curriculum and those parts of the curriculum that again are being attacked. And when I was on the school board, we occasionally had these things coming on, but it wasn't the same time as it is now. And our approach was always to move to the idea that students and families in our community are not served when we attempt to censor parts of our curriculum. They're just not served. And that's where we always left it. Like, you can say this all day long, but the students and families of our community are not served when we censor our curriculum, and that's where we always stopped.
I'll take another question here. I'll come. All right, sure, yeah.
My name's Juan Carlos Garcia. I live in Pomona, California, not too far from Temecula. But I wanted to bring up the issue of at-large elections versus trustee area elections. I think that's a huge obstacle. You can have great candidates running, but if it's going to cost them $40,000 to have a viable campaign to run across the whole city, it's going to be impossible to elect these great candidates. And also just wanted to highlight that a lot of times when we think of critical race theory, we think of more how it affects black studies, but there's a history of anti-Chicano studies, anti-Mexican American studies in Texas, in Arizona. So I think one solution also is to push for ethnic studies. So not just elect, but push for it.
Any comment on protecting labor studies, ethics studies, and you'll get the final question here. It's 4:44 already.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to. I mean, we should be adopting that curriculum. There should be state standards in every state for that curriculum, the same as there is for everything else. And I think that would be a great way to push back on the CRT argument. And I'll also say that yes, democracy is better served in district elections than at-large elections. And so in California, you probably know this. This happens all the time. The moment you say we're going to sue if you don't move to by district elections, every single school board will immediately turn around and say, that sounds like a great idea. We'd like to do by district elections because they know they will lose. So I don't know how it works in other states, but I know in California that if you have at-large elections and you want to move to by district, all you have to do is raise the issue, and it will happen because the school district doesn't want to spend those resources to defend what they know will be a losing fight.
All right, our final question from the floor.
Hi, I just have a two-pronged question. So my first one is, I think we've noticed, like in your slideshow, there are a lot of right-wing groups that are pushing money into these school board elections. What is it going to take for our side, the progressive group, to get as organized and combat this? And then have you seen any other organizations in the field that are doing this well and can help organize and partner with you guys?
What's it gonna take? Boy, I don't know. Obviously, we've got to up our game in terms of organizing. And funding candidates never hurts. Sadly, that's often what it takes. I was lucky in my community when I, like I said, had a very small budget, because that was kind of before all this craziness happened and right-wing groups were pouring money in, so it wasn't so much of an issue. But yeah, I think it's recruiting people that are known in the community to either be candidates or to, build a support network. That was huge in my community, at least maybe not for getting me elected. Well, yes, it was, but also just encountering the craziness is when there's visible support, it kind of quiets down the noise from the right. And I think that intimidation works. It works. That's why they use it. So if we use it, not in the same way, but just in numbers, like reinforcing that we're the majority, that tends to kind of diminish their feist, I guess. They tend to, in my experience, I'm sure it's not like that everywhere where there's really strong Moms for Liberty presence, but I do think that part of it is being visible. Because that does, they lose a little bit of their boldness.
Yeah, I would say organize in your community, right? These are local elections. So organize in your community. Find the people we've talked about. Encourage them to run. Support them. Knock doors for them, right? Just that basic grassroots democracy is the real antidote to all of this. There are national groups that are out there, like Education Justice Academy. It's a 501c3 that we met the director of the other day. Definitely going to partner with them. They train candidates on running for school board. So that's a fantastic resource. And again, groups like Run for Something or Emerge, they're actively involved in these races as well. But I do think it really starts with us in our communities, finding the people to run, supporting them, and doing basic grassroots democracy. That's how we push back. That's how we win.
All right, are we fired up to take back our schools? I don't hear you. Are we fired up to take back our schools?
Yeah. Yes.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for this today. Thank you all for coming, and on behalf of all of us here at Netroots Nation Chicago, we'll see you next year. Have a good, safe journey home.